Okay, so this is session 3, Interactive Connections, Memory Mapped Relationships, and Brains That Work Best in Community. And so I hope that you had a good time with your small groups in session 2, looking for memories that were particularly positive, stirring up deliberate appreciation. And today we're going to just deepen that idea with a few new concepts around the Emmanuel approach. So this is going to build on our previous session, and after this session we're going to be doing another group exercise in our groups of 3, and we're going to be adding on to the pieces that we already used. And so a few new concepts for you. One is if you took a look at the case study of Rita, talking about Jesus is better than candy. I wanted you to see how simple that was, how non-dramatic, it was not super hyper-spiritual. It was just a simple, matter-of-fact connection with Jesus. And one of the interesting things about Rita's experience with food, with candy, is that there was an emotional piece that was missing that she was filling with candy. And when she was able to address the emotional need that was filling that hole, or that was creating that hole with Jesus, then she was able to break the addiction. And it wasn't just a one-time experience. You notice that when Dr. Carl did the follow-up 6 months later, that impact was permanent. And that's one of the interesting things about the Emmanuel approach is my experience has been, if you have a strong connection with Jesus in a memory, it really does rewrite the memory permanently. So now every time you look back on that memory, it's hard to experience it without Jesus in it. I mean, you can, but the emotional content and the relational content of now Jesus was with you in that memory, that's now stuck. That's refiled in your hippocampus. And what you learned from that memory, the meaning that you made from that memory, which was, maybe negative emotional things, like negative lies and beliefs that you had believed because of the painful things that happened to you. Now those are overwritten with positive beliefs, like Jesus is with me, I'm not alone, and there's a solution for my problems that's satisfying to me. And so that's just one of the amazing things about doing this work in the context of memory rather than in the context of abstract concept, is when you rewrite memory files, you're actually rewriting emotional content. And so that's very exciting. And it's exciting that it seems to be relatively permanent in terms of the change. And I've experienced that to be the case as well. When we talk about connecting with Jesus, we're going to talk about an interactive, contingent connection with Jesus. That means that there's a real interaction. I'm not making Jesus's mouth move like a puppet. Our conversation is contingent on his response, so it's not made up. It's real. The foundation and the center of the Emmanuel approach is a mutual, interactive, contingent connection with the living personal presence of Jesus. I'm experiencing an interactive connection with the Lord when I perceive his presence in some way, and it feels true that we are having a living, real-time mutual interaction. And so I'll often ask participants, does it really feel true that Jesus is there with you? Is it sort of like, yeah, I can kind of imagine that, but it feels like I'm just making it up? Or does it actually feel true? That's an important sort of benchmark. Now, a person could be having a real interaction with Jesus that doesn't feel true. And in that case, there's a process of trying to strengthen that connection to the point that it feels true. But if somebody has a connection that feels true, then we'll say that they are having an interactive, contingent connection. It can be subtle, and the Lord's responses may not always include explicit verbal content. Okay? One of the interesting things about memories and relationships is that relationships are what we call memory mapped. And so when you think about a relationship, what you're actually thinking about is a series of specific instances in which you experienced specific things from that person that created like an emotional map to the memory. And so when we look at specific memories about relationships, that's carrying a lot of relational and emotional content. You stay with the content and images from the memory, but change the focus of your attention from the historical connection in the memory to the question of whether the Lord is with you as a living presence in that present moment. Okay? And so one of the other important things about working with specific memories is that when we describe the conditions under which those memories took place, especially if it's a positive memory, we recreate the just right conditions for connection. And so if you're, like I was in a particularly good time in my life, at the end of high school, I was sitting on the pier overlooking Lake Superior as the sun was rising and the cool breeze blowing across on that September morning, blowing on my face, while the steely blue expanse of the lake was stretched out before me. It was an experience of beauty and connection and peace. And when I described it, I could feel that sort of peacefulness and tranquility of being in that memory. And so I'm actually recreating in my brain through memory those just right conditions, because I had a connection or an experience of something positive, deliberate appreciation in that original memory. And if I can recreate it verbally, then I'm actually recreating that experience in my brain so that I can use that to create a contingent, living, interactive connection. And so again, when we're looking for memories, we can look for God memories or we can look for non-God positive memories. Either way works for us because there's something about the experience of joy and deliberate appreciation that because God's presence is relational, God himself is relational, he seems to gravitate towards those relational spaces. And one of the best ways that we can experience God is with our relational circuits on. We'll talk more about relational circuits later, but that's a very helpful thing to understand where your brain's at, is understanding relational circuits. All right, a couple of things about the brain. I'll read these because I'm not a brain scientist, but I want you to understand them because I think that this helps make sense of why saying it out loud and, well, let me just read this. The right prefrontal cortex is the primary area for interactions with other people. Okay, so the right side of my brain, right up here, prefrontal cortex, that's responsible for my interactions with people, especially face-to-face communication. That all gets processed through right orbital prefrontal cortex, right behind my eye here. The left prefrontal cortex is especially involved in language-based communication. So this is responsible for what Carl calls the verbal logical explainer. This is making language and making something verbal. So both the right prefrontal cortex and the left prefrontal cortices are heavily involved in perceiving the meaning of a particular piece of mental content, and especially in perceiving how any particular mental content fits into one's personal autobiographical story. So, our internal mental content needs to be processed through the right-sided prefrontal cortices in order for us to be able to feel its importance. Okay? Our internal mental content needs to be processed through both our left and right prefrontal cortices in order for us to be able to recognize its meaning, and especially for us to be able to recognize how a piece of content relates to our personal autobiographical story. The face-to-face social interaction task of communicating with the facilitator or others in a small group causes the content we are describing to be processed through the right prefrontal cortex. The language task of getting words to describe our mental content causes the content to be processed through the left prefrontal cortex. And so what I want you to understand is the importance of describing out loud whatever comes into your mental awareness, whether it feels important, meaningful, or significant. Because as you put language to what you are sensing, seeing, and experiencing, it goes from your right to your left and back, and it is being pulled through your brain in a way that your brain can understand meaning. That's part of why that people sometimes don't fully understand what they are feeling or thinking or sensing until they say it out loud. We do a very interesting exercise called Emmanuel journaling, and Emmanuel journaling was developed by some friends of Jim Wilder, using what Dr. Jim Wilder calls the 5 messages, the 5 I believe messages of attunement. He talks about attunement as 5 ascending messages, and he uses the different parts of the brain, from the brainstem all the way up into the prefrontal cortex, to talk, and the layers of the brain, to talk about how these different messages are received sequentially in our brain to create an experience of attunement. Attunement is that experience that we all know of feeling felt. It's that deep emotional connection where we feel comfortable and safe with another person, we feel connected to them. And the 5 messages are very simply this. Number 1, I see you. I see what's going on with your body physically. Number 2, I hear you. So I hear the words coming out of your mouth, and I can reflect back to you that I understand what you're saying. Number 3, I understand how big this is for you. In other words, I understand not only what you're saying, but also emotionally the size and the scope of what you're communicating to me. Number 4, I like being with you. And so even if somebody has shared something very, very significant or very scary or very happy or whatever it is, you're able to communicate that message. Hey, I like you. I like being with you. And number 5, I can do something to help you. So those 5 messages are what infants need to feel from their caregiver. It's what adults need to feel from their relationships. And it's ultimately what we need to feel from God. And when we can feel that those 5 messages coming from God, then we are able to feel felt, in a sense, by God, to feel seen, heard, understood, loved, and helped. Now, we do a really interesting exercise called Emmanuel journaling, where we write down those 5 sequential messages, and we write a letter from God to us. We ask God to help write this letter from God to us around these 5 messages. I see where you are right now. I see what you're doing. I see, you shaking your knee, you moving your head, you tensing your muscles. I see the tightness in your stomach. I see the smile on your face. I hear you. I hear what you're saying, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. I get how big this is for you. And we write down messages from God that He's saying to us around these 5 attuning messages. I like being with you. You're my child. I delight in you. I can do something to help you. And we write down, what God wants to do to help us. And then we read it out loud to the group. And this is the point that I want to make. When people read it out loud to the group, after writing it down on paper, something happens, and they often begin to cry because they have an emotional connection to the words that God said to them that they didn't have before. So when they were writing it, they didn't feel connected to those words, at least not deeply. Maybe they did to some degree. But when they read it out loud, it's going through the left prefrontal cortex, the language center, and then both cortices are able to feel the meaning of what they are reading out loud. And so what I'm saying is that verbalizing something with language is a very important part of understanding what it means. And when Jesus gives you a piece of mental content, it might not feel significant until you say it out loud. And then you are able to begin putting the pieces together. That's why we say so often in a manual approach, say whatever comes into your mental awareness, whether it feels neatly packaged, tied up with a ribbon, or not. Because there's oftentimes random little bits, quote unquote, random little bits of mental content that come into a person's awareness, and they have this nagging thought, I can't get this thought out of my head. I don't know what it means. I don't understand it. And the facilitator can say, well, hey, bring it to the table and let's ask Jesus together about it. The person is able to say what that little bit of content is, and oftentimes that's the key to unlocking the rest of the session. Not always, but often the person really just needs to trust that what comes immediately into their mental awareness is actually God's way of communicating to them, or at least their brain's way of communicating to them. And there's really important messages that we can gain just from coaching somebody to describe everything that comes into her awareness or his awareness, regardless of whether it feels important, makes sense, or is neatly packaged. Oftentimes when somebody gets that message, that little bit of information that doesn't feel significant, and then they describe it, and they realize actually it's very significant, that's the tipping point for them, where they're able to say, wow, okay, I'm experiencing something real, something important, and they're learning with both sides of their brain. So very, very cool stuff. Okay, let's jump into our next interactive connection exercise. This is going to be session 4, and you should have a handout for this. For this connection exercise, we're going to do the same thing we did last time, where we bring back that positive memory. And you can use the same positive memory you did before, or ideally, try bringing in a new positive memory. That way you're building a library of different positive memories. And you're going to picture yourself back inside that original experience, describe that memory in as much detail as possible to your facilitator. What did you see, hear, smell, taste, feel on your skin? Any emotional content, or somatic body content. What are you feeling inside of your body? And then talk about save, or go back, describe again briefly, savor the different aspects of the experience that you appreciate the most. Soak in that delicious gratitude experience. And then we're going to invite Jesus in. And so you can coach, if you're the facilitator, you can coach your participant to pray something like this. Now, I want you to pray something like, Jesus, I know in faith you were with me when I was in this memory. I welcome you to be with me now in this memory. Help me to perceive your living, interactive presence. And then you're going to say, okay, as you're able, describe everything that comes into your awareness, regardless of whether it feels important, makes sense, or is neatly packaged. Describe in detail any perceptions that may even possibly be manifestations of Jesus's presence or interactions with Jesus. And so you're going to make the invitation, and then you're going to wait. And you're going to allow the participant to describe to you, as the facilitator, any way in which they perceive Jesus's presence. Now, when the person is able to perceive Jesus's presence in any way, it's important to ask them to pay attention to any details that they notice about Jesus, anything he's wearing, any way that he appears to look, his hair, his beard. Is he Sunday school Jesus? Is he just wearing modern clothes? Does he look happy, sad, angry? What does he look like? And then one important question, which I always like to ask have people ask Jesus. If you can see Jesus and if he's in proximity where you can ask him a question and it feels real that he's there, ask him, how does he feel about being with you? And then tell me any sense of how he responds to that question. Jesus, how do you feel about being with me? And this is a very powerful question because a person can begin to receive that attunement of Jesus saying, I'm delighted to be with you. I'm very happy to be with you. Now, if the person is not able to perceive Jesus in any way, the very basic, super simple troubleshooting method that we're going to ask you to use at this time, and there's more advanced troubleshooting that we'll talk about later, but for now, just the simplest troubleshooting method is to ask Jesus what's in the way. So coach the participant to ask Jesus, saying, in faith, we know that Jesus in this memory was with you, even though you can't perceive him. So I would like you to ask the Lord, what's in the way of me being able to perceive you? And to notice and describe anything that comes into your awareness, regardless of whether it feels important, makes sense, or is neatly packaged. And the person may have a memory come up. They may know the answer to the question, oh, well, I'm really scared of Jesus being here with me, or I really don't like Jesus, or I've had some bad experiences with Jesus. And you're able to then ask Jesus, ask the Lord, how can I cooperate with your plan to resolve this blockage? And then notice and describe anything that comes into your awareness. Again, whether it feels important, makes sense, or is neatly packaged. And oftentimes the person, with the Lord's help, will be able to understand and guide themselves through that blockage scenario. Now, this is a major test for us as facilitators because it's a huge temptation for us to say, well, I know what's in the way. Do you have any ancestral covenants or vows? Do you have any sin in your life? Do you have any unforgiveness? Do you have any of this? Do you have any of that? And that can come into play if the person is not able to resolve their own blockages with Jesus. But if the person is able to perceive what the blockage is and what Jesus is asking them to do to remove the blockage so that they can connect with him, that is so much better because they're taking ownership over their own relationship and their own connection with Jesus. It's safer, it's better. And so that moment of asking the Lord what's in the way and then letting the participant hear from the Lord themselves what's in the way and what they can do to remove that blockage so that they can become more aware of God's presence. That's a very, very powerful relational step. And if they're able to do that for themselves, then they'll be able to do that in the future when they get blocked again. Say, okay, Lord, what's in the way? That's the simplest troubleshooting technique, is just asking the Lord, all right, what's in the way? And what are you asking me to do as the participant to resolve that blockage and to take one more step towards you? All right, so that's what you're going to be doing in your groups. You're going to be stirring up the positive memory, inviting Jesus into it, and doing simple troubleshooting if you have any problems perceiving Jesus' presence. Have fun. I'll see you later.